There appears to be a lot of trees being cut down because there's such growth going on here. There's a lot of development. I would say this: there are a lot of people passionate about this issue, and there is one gentleman in particular who's running for office. He has a pretty good understanding of it and has explained some things to me that I didn't know about before. So I believe that the town does take this seriously, and there are many things in our UDO with our planning department that will put developers on notice and what we want in Apex. I made a statement before about plans with developers and things when it comes to not just trees, but anything that impacts the quality of life for our citizens. And that is, once we establish a plan, if a developer presents it and it doesn't fit Apex, they must resubmit, because we have to stand our ground on what's good for Apex. And if that's preserving our trees and making sure that our citizens' quality of life is not impacted, I will certainly support that, and I will do everything possible as a mayor to make sure we get that done.
Okay, so it's another complicated topic. So for commercial use, state law has mandated that we can't stop commercial logging. If someone logs commercially, it's allowed, and we can't prevent it. For residential development, though, I think we're done clear cutting completely. Like, I don't see me being in favor of development which is to clear cut in a mass grade without some sort of environmental mitigation. I've pushed a tree protection ordinance in the past, and what that really does is requires you to replant the trees you cut down if they need to be cut down for development, and that's, I think, a reasonable approach. It's done in most places in the country. It's a pretty common thing, but for some reason, here in Apex, it's viewed as kind of a foreign concept and some hippie thing that we're doing. But it's really basic. If you need to cut down trees, you should replace them. We've recently increased our RCA, which is the part of the area where you're not allowed to touch in a development, from initial 3% for clear cutting and mass grades, which is good. So that's 30% of the area that you can't clear cut. It's the other 70, and the other 70 is where the tree protections come in. What can we do to, if we make it more expensive to cut down these trees by making them replace them, I predict you'll suddenly find developers having plans which incorporate the trees more in lots and in yards. But it's going to be a balance, and it's one of those things where we want to make sure we make requirements to mitigate the damage when it has to be done, and not just allow it to go on unfettered. So, I mean, my platform is built around protecting the environment, protecting the tree canopy cover in Apex. And the tree canopy study you mentioned, you're right, it was done, and then it was put in a drawer, and as far as I know, it's still sitting there. When I proposed the tree ordinance that I just spoke about, one of the things that the council members did is like, hey, we just did a canopy study. Can we incorporate some of the recommendations there? It feels like there's some overlap here, which is a smart thing to do. But again, I haven't seen any motion on that since it was brought up, and it's definitely something I plan on bringing up again. I want to make sure that when we're cutting down trees, you have to replace them. It's really as simple as that. And if you make it expensive to replace them, if there's a cost associated, they're going to find ways to do it less. Is my prediction.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I live in one of the oldest neighborhoods in Apex, in Knollwood, and I have 50, 60-year-old trees in my yard, and I love it. It looks beautiful, right? But when they built that development, it didn't look like that, right? And they actually had smaller buffer requirements back then, if any buffer requirements. I don't know. I haven't looked back as far as the 60s on buffer requirements for trees. But the thing with growth and managing the growth is that you're gonna have to cut down a tree to put a house there, right? I mean, I'm sure a tree was cut down to build my house, and who knows, if trees were cut down to build anybody else's house. I'm sure they were, right? So, but we have pretty strict requirements on replanting trees, enhanced buffers, and a lot of times we require the buffers to be what's called undisturbed buffers, right? So you can't bulldoze a buffer and come back and plant trees. It has to be undisturbed. You have to leave it alone. So that allows for those large growth trees to stay in place. So yeah, again, we have the transportation plan, the greenway plan across town, and the challenge becomes when you build a greenway through a development that's a new development, then it has to take time, right? But if you look at like Apex Community Park, the lake, we all love the lake around there. I remember when they built it and there wasn't a whole lot of green around that lake, but over time, right, things kind of come back to how you envision them to be. So it's a challenge for sure to build a greenway through a new development and for it to look a whole lot of green. But yeah, I'll absolutely work to continue to make sure One of the things we're doing too, I'm sorry to go on about this, is building greenways in like creek beds, creek protected areas, right? Like the buffers outside of a creek. Depending on what kind of creek or stream it is, you're going to have a 50 or 100 foot buffer that you can't build in or do anything in, right? So with putting a greenway in that area, if you can get it allowed, that's a great place, I think, for one to go, because you maintain that natural character and feel of that space. I think we all love trees and large growth trees, and I think it's important to definitely consider them. For example, we're building a new electric operations center on Mount Zion Church Road, and there's a beautiful big oak tree at the front of that property. And we design the roads, the in and out, and the building around that tree. We don't have to take that tree down. So I think that's awesome that we can put thoughts and plans in place to preserve that. On the other end of the spectrum is the senior center on Town Hall campus. There are some beautiful trees on Town Hall campus, but we just can't, there's no way to put the senior center on Town Hall campus without taking those trees out. So I think they definitely need to be and remain in the conversation as we continue to grow and add to our town.
Well, I am in support of expanding our tree ordinance here in Apex. I'm very concerned about the clear cutting of trees as well, and how that impacts our stormwater management. And some of you may know that in 2018, a study was done here in Apex that was with the assistance of the North Carolina Forestry Service. And there's a very detailed report on the town website about recommendations for how we can actually better use trees in our stormwater management practices. And I don't think they've been implemented yet, but I think there's opportunity for several of those recommendations to be implemented. And one of them is about enhancing our tree ordinance. One is about investing in our urban tree canopy, which I support. There are ideas about a tree replacement policy that we could think about in terms of builders and developers. Trees are very important in combating climate change and carbon emissions. And so I definitely support taking care of our environment and investing in our trees.